matzah.
Which is to say another story completely, assuming any of what follows can rightly even be considered a ghost story, rather than delve into the devices and biases and oddly canted idiom of the five persons.
One of whom in the early years slept with another and now endlessly wonders about the lakes of fall.
Where someone else once wandered.
Two of whom still nurture their affection for one another, expressing so in an array of notes and overseas phone calls.
A fourth who lost three. And the last of whom, from the prison of a later life, hates them all.
Or represent them throughout with characterizing phrases, temporal references, and even more quotation marks hopelessly nested within reiterating nests of still more. To delineate their respective and independently conducted interviews, colored quotation marks are used instead.
Or voices.
Tonight, only voices.
And shadows.
Many shadows.
Where no voices sound, only the worst should be assumed. An interruption by someone other than one of the before-mentioned persons, the reader, or even the author, who additionally, it must be stated, has done nothing more than lend together these gathered and re-related bits so as to here present a pretty peculiar and perhaps altogether alternate history of one
October evening in East Texas. No matter how you cut it,
No matter.
Chintana, Ned didn't accept.
only at the last moment for reasons vague,
If vaguely professional.
did she force from herself a reply, in the affirmative, obviously, to
Accept the tape.
Yes, accept.
the invitation.
Mose Down's invitation.
Fact is, what Chintana had discovered since the divorce was that most everything required force.
Opening her eyes, her hands even opening her medicine cabinet.
Force.
Force open the can of bitter tea leaves. Force back the tough tongues of those walking shoes she kept perched
By a birdcage.
Force even a smirk she hoped could serve, temporarily at least, as a not-so-scored and hard-hunted age.
Shimmerly.
Especially when in the acknowledgement of something she recognized as social duty, she was forced to acknowledge
Yet again.
To yet another intrusive customer, her husband provides a surprising departure.
Cravat.
provide.
Force back something else, too.
Mustn't forget that.
The terrible agony she wished day out and night in to lash across the throat of anyone who forced from her all such incessant acts of acknowledging.
In the first place.
Despite pacific beliefs, only infliction promised her peace.
And for sure,
As Chintana had found out,
What came most effortlessly to her nowadays had already happened.
but 5 weeks earlier, when the scissors, doing their happy skew across the
Bias of a patent lawyer drapes, dancing silvery sharp through the separating cotton, arrested finally when their metal V wedged deep into her.
soft thumb.
She lost the nail, but the local hand surgeon had stitched back the flap.
Taped on a butterfly for good measure, too.
And she had forced herself to thank him, and
Somehow,
Carry on.
she did not then, as she could not now, seem to acknowledge to herself just how easily she could have seen it happen to someone.
else's
thumb.
And so, of course,
Chintana had once more reconsidered whether or not
She'd make it.
To Mose Down's Halloween party.
And seems she probably would have taken a miss had it not been for
Her twin,
Stitchimacated.
In Austin.
who had sternly counseled.
Risk it.
So Jeanlouis had risked it, preparing her bitter tea and swallowing hard before leaving behind the thread and machines of her trade.
Her unoccupied cage.
For the 182 East.
Running its stabbing hope through the falling dark.
Chintana always found the particulars of most Dettledown's gatherings odd. But what else could one expect from a 112-year-old nutjob, still at ease?
In those deteriorating ribs of her East Texas removed, slumped down amidst the hickory.
And Mexican wild.
Plum. A few times a year, Mose would generously serve up
And
booze.
sweet.
To typify the many strangers against the expected strangeness of her minglings, where someone like Chintana, a seamstress, could find herself
Deflecting the advances of an inebriated city alderman.
Mose, though rarely appeared herself. In fact, running into her at all, most certainly tonight would be like crossing up with a ghost.
Though, a ghost would be nice.
Crossing up with a ghost, thought Chintana, was about the only thing that would keep her cutting her own appearance short.
In fact, Jeanlouis had only gotten as far as the coat rack when she thought for the third
And last time,
about retreat.
This being so because the very first person,
not the third or even the
second, but the very
First person.
she was forced to smile at was the already smirking Belinda Kite.
Belinda.
Right there in Mose Dettledown's foyer atrium, Belinda Kite.
eyeing Jeanlouis' entrance with shearing scrutiny.
More red-eyed than a coyote sniffing a salt block in drought.
Bangle rattle arm, twisting rattler, mean and to her side.
Gums receding around the dead shine of her teeth like.
Well now, if it isn't Miss Lost and Let Down.
Belinda Kite might have snipped. Or, more benignly,
Delivers in the back.
Or just a lucky carnal clickety-click.
And maybe something like so did actually tickle her teeth-tickling lips.
but it never got no further.
Not that night.
And what a cold, cold night it had already become.
Because
The sharpest tongue in East Texas knew better. One word, even the slightest indacitation of intimacy, could very well have brought about her own
extinction.
and
The two women actually touched.
A path, perhaps?
oh no, something slight in passing.
Oh,
The results would have been cataclysmic, even worse.
unimaginable.
And so right there on the spot,
Those pocked eyes.
Flittered nervously around like a murderer.
of crows told Chintana,
Belinda Kite knew exactly what she had become.
Here then was another consequence of Belinda Kite's stolen times would provide.
Belinda Kite, who could routinely make anyone cry from Fort Worth to Nacogdoches.
who most certainly would make some poor wretch cry tonight.
Saw right then.
Right there.
Right square in the middle of Mose Dettledown's foyer atrium, something she could not challenge.
Or even reach for.
And so practically ran.
Scurrying backwards, pocketed eyes flying off to his side.
Until all of it was sidewind and gone for the stammer of guests in the back.
Chintana shook and sighed and reconsidered her twin's counsel.
Maybe some things aren't worth the risk. And then along came the little ones.
And that sure put a change in her.
After all, what did they
know about risk, or care for that matter.
They were too young. Their play,
The privacy of that practical mayhem and racket?
Protected them, zigzagging this way.
their way.
Dash down diversion, fast across the dining room.
Eastern cottontails.
Sweet baby bob white.
Down some stairs, spinning sideways, socks slipping them up
On the
some.
smooth groove
But
floors.
those small hands, always grabbing fast
A
enough.
possum grip for a corner.
Just in time to catch the slide and swing them into an accelerating arc towards another warped hall.
And sure comes spring. The wraparound porch outside with its gape at the sweet gum
Lob, lolly, pine.
and maple could serve their turns.
Pernicious terms.
But tonight,
With the wind already whipping up something wrong.
the dogs howling in their kennels,
5 such.
orphans confined their tie-dye hues to the shadow of adult conversation and back rooms.
Steeped in abandonment.
Theirs was abandonment's insurrection, the coup de grace of feral play. And so they flung themselves so,
Panting and rosy past the foyer door.
astride their steeds, Styx Palomino buckskin.
Sorrel, bay, and blackened.
Chintana felt herself warm and ease.
Here was enough.
They were enough.
And even if Chintana wasn't quite able to put her thumb on it, how strange still that just 5
Orphans, but the pat-pitter of their footsteps on such an instance.
after such an incident.
Could catch Stitch, a bit at least. The lacerations of grief 6 months continued to inflict. Their offers somehow different from everything else.
Something marked, felt, and clean.
As if to say,
So to say,
Or so it seemed.
there was time. There was time.
Yes, there still was time.
so maybe Chintana had misconstrued Mose Dettledown's invitation after all.
Wallops of scotch, dear. Don't deprive yourself of the pleasures of my company or my good cheer.
Maybe Mose hadn't been insinuating matching pleasure with a local stonecutter.
Or silo manufacturer.
Or for that matter, saber rattling with the likes of Belinda Kite.
Maybe Mose had only emphasized the pleasure of...
These five.
So Chintana shed her gravecoat along with the cold still slicing across the fields.
Down through the fallen redbud and trumpet creeper.
And fast enough, found herself chatting with the social worker trailing the stampede, where she learned that this year Dettledown's Halloween would end
At mine died with.
someone's birthday.
Whose, Chintana wondered.
stuffing her wool scarf into her coat sleeve. Stitch in my side if I know, shrugged the sleepy social worker. Oh, my tired feet.
They're a handful.
Oh, sweetie, if I could only get my hands on them to say.
Chintana offered to find coffee, and when the social worker's eyes responded,
Quick clip Bobcat, right for the yes.
Chintana happily headed off, threading her way through the crowd in the ever health of 7 months.
Mightier than and unkindest of all.
Of course, I mean the dance.
Ask us! Carrying on the way a lutching Bob Sandlin park ranger and even an
I want to cut up a rug with you, gas station owner.
Swaying on fumes while wheezing about tax cuts and that damn old police.
until she was
In time saves
To the
nine.
quick.
Nick, nick, nick.
Real tranche de la vie, her.
edging in on the tankards of steaming bean brew and cider, where Chintana overheard from a car dealer and taxidermist that the birthday in question
It was a champagne birthday.
And a 50th birthday, no less.
Not surprised she was carved out at midnight, one says.
She insists to the second, said the other.
for none other than that bitch witch Belinda Kite.
Chintana all too gladly retreated.
To the quieter reaches and vacancies of the ranch.
Her cup to take sloshing in hand.
Mine made up to leave long before midnight.
Finding at last the orphans drinking it on.
On furniture and walls like so many mad, pileated woodpeckers. Beaver busy.
Too many hours, shooed the social worker.
Gratefully accepting Chintana's concoctions.
Don't know how much longer I can do this.
I have my own kids, too, to keep after, so... But I guess these also are...
Worth the extra coffee and sugar, Chintana finished.
I imagine they are the sugar. And right then,
Young boy.
frenzied as a storm-started wood squirrel,
Dwashed over.
Can we stay for the party?
if we did talk, you would have to sit with the adults and talk with the adults and act like an adult. No fidgets or fusses. Not one peep. And that sure made 9-year talk fidget plenty.
Which hardly curtailed the 4-year-old girls.
Cottontail curiosities.
But what about the supplies?
His aid, an idea, sit this?
The social worker called out to the 2 8-year-olds.
And 7-year-old.
In mid-raccoon frolic, cutting decks, scattering decks of long ago.
Ravaged cards.
Our Mickett, the social worker continued, has asked about the surprise. But I'm only going to say this once.
And so the orphans re-rounded, collided.
A sudden blue jay of a rarity, wheeling as one before finally settling on the fence of quiet attention. Yes, Mose Dettledown has arranged a surprise
Special surprise for you and the other.
Youngins.
this night. But weather seems playing for some delay here, so we'll need to show some patience. Until then, there is the matter of some cake.
Whereupon, and you're instantly too.
Chintana was lost in the swirl and the riot of squeals and shouts until just as
Suddenly, they were gone.
Tarf,
his aid,
Inedia, Sithis, and It'll Mickett, 5 white-tailed deer race.
fleetly bounding by and around the knees of minglers and newcomers.
Grace and slick switch quick down long halls, far and away.
whippoorwills!
Cedar waxwings on air.
Straight at last for those faraway kitchen doors, battering out.
Large slices of buttery light.
Could lose a hand, Chintana laughed.
Could lose more than that, the social worker gleaned.
What sort of surprise is it this year anyway?
And the social worker, already trudging after the orphan, shrugged. Just a
Storyteller.
breath, gentleness, and gratitude, Chintana's twin typically counseled, must precede love.
She was a yoga body, meditating, low carb.
Tibet trekking cat lover.
And a butcher to boot.
That's
That's why, before any heart stuff,
Voice happily prick stitch in the shifting.
cellular connection, you first breathe and think, then practice breathing and thinking, and gently too, with every breath.
Jeanlouis had tried to practice, but just breathing required so much force it was almost inconceivable to imagine gratitude.
Let alone gentleness.
And anyway, gratitude for what or who?
What about Belinda Kite?
Belinda Kite.
The idea rushed spouts of color to her face. That lavish creature of bleach and gold, proudly pedigreed in the bloodlines of Texas foolery with a predatory...
If curstatory taste.
For minor men of all sports.
Usually not citizens, neither.
Offering the poor minority the charity of her shape and touch.
offering them their reverie. Who would as casually buy a Mercedes as dole out mercy every other year? Her mercy last year, in the backseat of her SUV with one of those boat people.
A Thai flower man married to a...
Thai seamstress.
A tight, muddy man who could tenderly lift fields of wild lupine,
Blackberry lily,
and lush evening primrose from the grieving earth,
Neither Gentana nor the marriage could afford that kind of Mercedes.
or survive that kind of mercy.
Pravat never had a chance, and the loss of some larger dream for him.
Some cultural intertwining.
Collusion, coupled with the betrayal, Belinda Kite's and his own, left him too cut up inside. Also gutted and gutless after all.
To carry on.
And to have him,
all Belinda had had to do was press into his cupped hands a frail bit of embroidery her own fingers had clumsily threaded,
And at points,
bled upon.
barely managing with cruel white work and a forbidden stitch that
Smocking shade of a single.
Harvester
with dark orange
wings.
to leave him though,
And soon after, too,
Belinda Kite was far more bloodless.
a pasty blue-eyed ex-officer explaining in diligent tones how even stepping towards a doorbell could be read as trespassing.
and so punishable by the law.
Chintana found out every disconcerting detail and even
Snip, snip.
Undid,
click, click.
Stitch by
The
stitch.
offending thief.
intoxicant, spell-casting lure.
Because Chintana had been the only one Pravat knew well enough to confess his torture to.
When he left in April,
Flights of green-backed hair and shrieking in his brow told her
What he'd already made of his wife,
but the
Falling eagle
on his lips also told her he had finally stopped bleeding inside.
he could smile vaguely again.
limply clap her hand with his two riverbed hands, nodding gratefully only because, like the desiccated rose of his flowers and tears,
Black crutches, all of it now.
mere shadows on the grave.
He too, like a passing day.
Was already gone.
The social worker had mentioned other.
Youngins.
But that night, Chintana saw no sign of any more.
maybe the increasing cold.
Or the peculiar threat of a storm.
Or Belinda Kite's birthday.
Had turned parents from wrestling with seat belts and car seats
To those oh so...
many lists of babysitters tacked conveniently by a phone.
Jindana rubbed the violet line on her thumb as a woman with topaz clamped on her ears burst past her towards a small bathroom tucked under the main stairs.
Such a hateful paw! The woman sput-stutter sobbed to Chintana.
To no one in particular.
Diving for the comforts of lock and running water.
Thereupon, Chintana's thumb abruptly began to soar a little.
And she felt bleed
As if 1,000.
Vengeances upon vengeances were dicing her suddenly.
Into hail.
Though the cause was none too mysterious.
The front door just stood wide open.
Though when it had been flung so, Jindana would never remember.
The porch lights were extinguished too, oddly.
And what's more, a shadow now cut across the threshold.
Though without moon or stars in the Texas sky, this was an awful impossibility.
For here, reaching towards her, it seemed was a shadow cast by nothing
Other than the darkness itself.
Most would have denied the sight of the term.
a cry.
Flight!
But maybe because Gentana too, day out and night in,
Could so easily consider doing the same.
What would leave these rooms drenched in silence?
and blood.
She welcomed him.
The orphans.
Was all he said.
And Gentana showed him the way.
At first, the 5
Orphans.
5 jittery swamp rabbits.
I know some better golfers.
Recoiled at the sight of.
The story.
Tell it.
It didn't help that the library had not suited his taste or his hulking form.
Bent and growling.
Had led them up a tight wind of back stairs into a small parlor already dimly lit with
5 season-poured candles of ginger.
Cinnamon.
Nutmeg.
cloves.
And molasses clustered in an uneven arc away from the 5 dark windows, all tightly closed.
Surely Moses' work.
Only when he finally sat down on the floor did the orphan seem to relax.
Enchanted, quick enough by the manner of his dimension.
So crossing his legs, folding himself into himself.
Refolding until right before their eyes, he no longer seemed...
Prowling or gawking, but sat quiet still.
Overdraped in his strange silvery black tunic, his head heavily bowed.
Following this example, Tarf,
It's a
Nidia,
Sithis and
Mickett sat down too,
crossing their legs, and if not,
exactly little.
and bushy bluestone cozy.
that armadillo tight.
wanting now only to know what was inside.
as for the social worker, with her burden of watchful responsibility momentarily suspended,
She took her place in a back corner lounge chair and, stretching out her legs, yawned,
Chintana as well succumbed to her own shadows and seed.
trying idly to figure out
This figure's peculiar origins.
The narrow eyes or sharp squeezed brow.
the profoundly wide forehead,
or the dark lips rounding out into the deeper creases of his cheek, all mute and formless, but somehow adding up to something Chintana knew only as
awfully. Or perhaps it wasn't him at all, but another question of origin.
the box he carried.
A narrow thing with angles of glass.
6 feet long, easy, with an ochre sash for a handle above the odd engraving.
T50YS.
The 4 hinges faced in towards him. The 5 metal latches faced out towards the orphans.
The number of latches confused her and warned her.
But Chintana didn't know what to do with warnings anymore.
What I have to tell you,
He began slowly.
I must show you. But what I show you, I must also tell you. I have...
Only myself and where I've been then.
What I found and what I now bring.
and it will frighten you.
This was not the way such
Tales for 5.
Such orphans.
usually began.
Mickett cocked her head to one side, and his aide's hands fussed in his pocket.
Well, maybe there would still be some fun, Chintana mused.
Maybe the story.
Teller's strange and pompous gravity would be refused with
Bitterins and
Frowns.
Yet if the cloudy phrases released them,
his ever so slight nod towards the box recaptured them.
All I have to offer is right here to see. But if you scare easily, you should leave.
Tark looked at his aide.
who looked at Enidia, who looked at Sithis,
Who looked at Mickett, who defiantly looked back at the dark
Van and his
long box.
angles of black.
so they all stayed.
I am a bad man with a very black heart. And it was only that badness and blackness which forced me to seek out what I had.
Carried now for many years and brought this night for you. Because you are young, I will tell you I went in search of a weapon.
But also because you are young, I will not tell you why I went in search of such a weapon. Though in truth, while I could speculate,
I am no longer capable of recalling the details myself.
When you are older, you will be able to imagine what drove me on such a quest.
You will know then more than me.
But saying this, he did not look at the orphans, only at Chintana.
And maybe it was a coincidence, but her thumb began to hurt a little more.
At first, I went to places I knew.
Familiar places.
I examined ropes and knives of many sorts.
I considered oils and poisons.
I toyed with explosives.
I handled guns. Small guns, big guns.
Guns powerful enough to
Sever something.
anything in half with just one blast.
Chintana shifted uncomfortably.
Where were the animals?
The gleefully abandoned
The
orphans.
stormy skies, appropriate for a
Ghost story for the young?
Where was the company?
The social worker, however, seemed unconcerned.
That or too exhausted to resist the comforts of her recliner.
But none of it, the story,
Teller continued.
could match my taste for what my blackness ceaselessly scratched for.
And so I traveled farther and farther away, from north to
south, mountain to
Valley, coast to
coast, season by
Season. Until finally, I left the country on a ship, setting out for away and far places where faces are different.
Songs cradle words neither you nor I have ever heard.
And everywhere I stopped, everywhere I ate and drank,
or slept.
I asked about.
A weapon.
yet even in those distant places I received the same response.
Ropes, knives, poisons, explosives, and guns.
I shook my head, and my heart blackened more, and my badness spread so that
Whatever I touched, my badness touched too.
And seeped into.
Until finally, one night on the banks of a muddy flow,
What some might call a stream.
on the edge of another dirty city.
I took cover from a rain beneath slabs of concrete twisted through with rusted rebar.
Pain. It was a shelter I soon discovered already populated.
By rats!
But where I also overheard a story about
A valley of salt and
A forest of note,
And a mountain of
any
One.
paths, and a man with no
harms, who made terrible weapons which he sold but never for
money.
intrigued, I asked for a retelling of the story.
Carefully then I listened.
mesmerizing, memorizing every detail, prodding him to reveal still more until I was satisfied
He knew no more. And then I thanked him.
and I killed him.
Chitana jerked forward sharply.
Trying in vain to grab hold again of the words so casually uttered.
So easily laid open.
laid bare.
Unable to believe he said them in the first place, even if his
And
aid.
Nadia did whimper.
And Mika's head bent down, her eyes suddenly fixed
Absurdly.
on the worn
Crimson
carpet.
If only the social worker had given just one indecatation of alarm.
Chintana would have put a stop to the whole thing.
But blinks too of disbelief.
Enforced probably by her own torpidor.
Could merely put both women on a temporary state of alert.
Only his eyes.
Gray pools of Glum Lake ice told
Chintana what he had just succeeded in doing.
He had involved them.
And, what's more, had now made
Then,
accountable.
Soon then,
his always low,
rumbadilling voice continued.
The gutters of cities.
Curious derelictions half buried in abandoned farmlands.
Poisonous pools lingering in ancient.
quarries began to speak to me of
away.
And I listened and I
Followed. And after many months in roads strewn
in ruin, I came upon a course to what I would call the Valley
Of salt.
there nothing moved and I was
Alone. Anything that had stumbled.
upon such a wide way of gray grief had not chosen to stay.
only shadows remained.
Even mine left a charcoal smudge upon those dissected steeps.
Perhaps
Oh.
we were
Oh.
both still there today.
and I saw remnants of many a strange shadow too. Did you know stars
Have shadows?
They do. And can you imagine what it feels like to walk upon the shadow of a day?
I can't.
But I don't have to.
Soon after a long stretch among these
Shades of the grave, I began to feel a staring dryness removing me from myself in any chance I had to move.
Conversely, my shadow mark seemed to assume increasingly the
braid of substance?
Of location.
a point where in it I grew still. But right when I felt I should have become nothing,
More than a staid cratch of black.
An unbent dirt like a spent
moon,
I found I had left the valley.
Of salt and was now deepening into the forest.
A fallen
notes.
So here, you say, in a forest.
where I immediately found plenty of water. I should also find relief.
And rest.
I thought the same. I even felt happy enough to sing a few
notes.
And sing the story.
Teller suddenly did.
Much to the amusement of the orphans, and even Chintana.
A series of clucks.
Trills.
sputters and
Odd clicks caught in
Whistles in the back of his throat.
He grinned weirdly, and before
stopping. Even whom?
But this was only the song I sought to sing, not what ultimately spilled
Out of my lips. That sound was completely different.
For you see, in the peculiar forest of
Falling notes, sounds could not hold together.
like pearls on a snipped.
Silk thread they.
scattered wildly upon the ground.
It did not matter the sort of sound either, whether a melody, a whistle, or even
Nick, tick, or.
Click, crick.
All of it fell apart. It was even in the falling apart of a breeze.
So was there a breeze?
I could still feel it on my face.
and in the falling apart of rustling needles.
And see.
But were there even these?
If I could still feel them under my feet,
Even the stream I drank from, though it curled with taste.
I could only hear, in a terrifying way, all the sound of all.
The world there was
Constantly.
Severed.
Worse. What was initially curious and startling became more
and more terrible. For I began to fear as the sound of my passage and even my own thoughts were.
Disre mattered, that I was with ever buried.
Velocity going nowhere. That I had come from
Nowhere, that I was lost and soon too like the
Matter of my uncertain,
breathless scatter among these turns of this.
unspeakable wood.
Talked with frowns as they.
In idea,
And Sithis.
With exchanged glances.
It'll make it with a yawn, revealed then that they too were lost in their attentions.
Scattering.
But the
storyteller missed
Nothing.
Ah, yes. How hard it is to imagine that forest.
Oh.
Falling.
notes. I know.
I know.
And he lowered his head.
dramatically.
Causing the orphans to reflexively rock forward.
Imagine, he said pointedly.
His eyes still lost in the.
Downward tumble of his pose.
Imagine every sound, a sigh of but one thing.
Dying, and instead of
Coming one after another in
Sigh.
A sigh of
All at once.
what would that sound like?
and the story
Teller raised his head to look at one of the windows.
And Chintana felt something within.
Part,
Like a whale.
butterfly,
hope and hold,
not over the stabbing.
Pain in her thumb.
either,
which had clearly gotten much, much worse.
but over a horror far more simple.
She knew the windows had all been closed.
She remembered it clearly by the way the candles had
Burned all five.
Flames arrogantly vertical.
Impervious.
Now, though, the flames flickered wildly.
Dancing on the edge.
Of annihilation as a shriek of wind.
Freezing sky.
Whirled around the room.
Somehow, one window was now
Wide open.
The social worker had.
Leapt up to close it. Puzzled.
confused but clearly too drowsy to pay too much mind.
The story
Teller had the answer, but he only.
Looked at the
orphans with his own questions, which they responded to.
And in surprising unanimity.
With a question of their own.
Then what happened? I left gladly the forest of falling
Notes only to find myself at the base of a precarious path, rising up from twisting leaps of snow and looming
Boulders wrapped in a pale wisp.
always moving.
Cloud.
the mountain of
Many one
Paths had only one path as far as I could tell.
Here, at least, my shadow
traveled with me, and the songs I whistled made sense.
In fact, the mountain seemed.
Just.
mountain.
Only when I began the dangerous descent did I start.
To perceive through the briefly parting veils of.
Paul and missed another
Climber on what I admitted then had to be.
A second path.
Soon the figure was enveloped in white, never to be seen again. I'd begun to forget the sighting when on a
Completely different part of the mountain below me this time. I momentarily caught.
sight of another climber on a
third path.
This time, I moved down a little in his direction, only to watch a twisting sheet of white widen from my sight.
Nor was that the last time. On the contrary, it was the beginning.
Climbers began to.
Up all over the.
Mountain. Always on a different
Path always swept away by mist before reappearing somewhere else.
Eventually, though, I managed to get a little closer before the pale winds
Stole these solitary figures away, and it was then that I
could see how all of them looked
Exactly the same.
And not just the same as one another, but the same as me.
me.
And while to this day I cannot really tell you what took place on the
Mountain of
Many one paths.
I
Understand still that in spite of so many climbing
on
figures,
so many
paths. I was completely
Alone up there.
far worse than the
petrified shadows and the fallen
notes, the multiplication upon
multiplication of my own solitude.
Brought me repeatedly to the edge of despair. Which is where?
quite sensibly, really. I finally found the
man with
no
Arms.
First there to greet me, though, was
The soft glow of Osage orange and
a burnt hush surrounding me, softening me.
and how sleepy my strange travels had made me.
So I fell.
True.
into a
Hammock hung between two black willows.
two black hills.
Overleaning the edge of a pond where
I slept for 3 days and 3 nights.
And when at last I woke, I saw on the other
side of that pond a small hut. The door
Wide open with smoke drifting up from a
Chimney somewhere off in the back.
upon entering, I found only
2 chairs and a tiny table supporting one large bowl of hot tea.
I sat and drank all the tea, and when I lowered the bowl,
I discovered sitting opposite me the
Man with no
arms. So startled by his presence.
The grayness of his presence. Gray hair, gray whiskers.
gray eyebrows, grayer still, his wide eyes.
pupilless eyes.
All of him gray, except for his
eyelashes, long, willowy lashes rising out and up
As
as
if they were falling away from the earth itself. Not gray at all, but
luminous.
Violet.
I jerked backwards, dropping the empty bowl with a
Lingering.
clatter.
And right then, the storyteller
Also,
jerked back his 2 hands
Pale as February.
Thrust out from underneath the silvery black tunic.
To ward off some wild apparition, his grin twisted into
mock feast
startling the orphans into a laughter which,
in their own way.
Ellicicated his own chilling.
laugh.
You have come a long way.
the man with
No arms,
Said to me first, and I in vain.
and trying to locate the fallen.
Bowl could only nod.
You have come for one of my swords.
And again I nodded, though I had not known.
the weapons he made were swords.
You know they are expensive, but your
Heart is black and price as much as you know what price is.
Is no matter for you.
I said yes this time, and the
Man with
No.
Arms laughed like a corkscrew. There were so many. Some so small they could barely reach halfway across one of your palms.
Some, though, were wide as
a stair. Some wide.
In a road.
some curved like
thunder,
Some were
straight like the
sea's tides. Still others were thin like the breath of a June dew.
and a few I saw waved like heat.
off an August noon.
But all, as far as I could tell, had the same
Type of blade, milky white,
glossy and cold like
A fog creeping low across the morning before.
Funeral.
In fact, so curious was I about their composition, I reached out to touch one, and if not for a sharp click and a wild fluttering of his violet eyelashes, I would have succeeded.
They had cut every time, warned the man with
no arms.
Every
Time.
Smartly, I withdrew.
Here, he blinked quickly at a blade.
At least 4 feet long, tapering to a blunt tip.
this one. Took me 3 winters to make.
It kills the taste of salt. The one next to it kills the smell of wild lupine.
Blackberry lily and lush evening.
Primrose. There,
Turning to a fat blade suspended in the buzzing gray.
that one kills the color green.
And the man with no arms
grinned because he already knew the darkness I guarded and
With violent lash fluttering, turned away from those tiny cuts and led me
On to those deeper cuts, linking in and out of the strange.
Shift thickening haze.
here only a few swords floated.
These ones take lives, his violet lash
back. But unlike the smaller ones and the fat ones, they all appeared
to be
The same. Sleek.
and long and
Bow like a theft.
but they're not the same at all. Closest
to you is a 10-year sword. That one's
a 25-year sword, 100 above it, and there are 280.
7 years sword.
And this one? I asked tentatively, reaching for the handle until...
Unchecked, I actually took hold of it.
That's your 50-year sword, he said.
Oddly.
You almost can't see.
the blade I added, marveling at the way.
The weapon bit through the air.
The way the finely carved handle.
Bound in a fine fall braid and beaded.
With winks of pale pearl seemed with every swipe to melt into my palm.
Oh, the man
With no arms chuckled. You can never
see the blade.
Which I would not understand until I'd returned and found mine.
Blade had dissolved into
Breezes and hours.
But will it kill? I wanted to know.
dimly resenting him now that my sword
Hung once again
in that flickering deep.
In half a century. From birth to the...
Final second of the 50th year.
Every time.
Most of the time.
It surprised me.
Why most?
No weapon is perfect. Whatever this blade passes through, it most certainly
Will divide. Though there is one thing which can stitch and hold the...
Wound.
What's that?
Your heart is blacker than will ever be told. But that is why you are here.
Beyond him then, I caught sight of still more swords. Though these were...
Inconceivably long.
For you, maybe.
Said the man with no arms.
For me, they are as they are. Some are...
Mile long. Some
A river long. There is one that is a sky long.
They kill lives too.
I suppose. One sword will kill
A season. One will kill a country. One I'm making now.
Will even kill an idea.
An idea. I pondered.
But those are too expensive for you. And his violet lashes seemed to
Tremble with delight.
How much? I pressed.
The wielder must die before...
Wielding it.
But
I objected.
yes, it's tricky. Too tricky for you, as I already said.
Too expensive.
Then the man with no arms led me back among the tiny and wavering swords.
These cost a breath you may never take again. Those, a feeling you may never shape again.
Then his lashes quivered daintily.
Beware though, as all are double-edged and come with this warning.
Should a wound ever fail,
You,
Will vanish.
like the blade,
You wield. But I didn't care.
what about the 50-year sword?
Your sword?
His violet lashes twitching.
Slyly.
I could not object. I knew too it was my sword. I knew.
When the handle melted beneath my fingers and the blade shivered.
Familiarly along my arm and into my
Past,
yes. How much is my sword?
a memory you have, which would have
Outlived.
you.
And before I had even finished saying agreed, the man
No arm somehow already
Held clenched.
between his teeth, the handle of a sword with a blade which swayed.
like a long blade of evening grass.
Just as quickly, too, he slid behind.
Me and I felt a sting between.
My shoulder blades, and then a fire, and a cold, and a sudden something.
Seep of hurt. And then my eyes dried up, and they also hurt.
There, blinked the man with no arms, happily showing me what was now
Separate, suspended carefully.
In the air.
A single harvester.
with dark orange.
Wings.
Struck through with light and dapples.
A bruised dark.
What is it? I wanted to know.
But his violet lashes flickered, as if now to say,
No.
And he boxed up my 50-year sword and never said more.
And so I descended the mountain of
Any one paths crossing back through the
Forest of
no before finally making my way
Away from the valley,
assault.
and only in the years to come would I realize what
He had taken.
My heart stayed just
as
as
black and my badness spread.
more easily, but
the memory
And reason.
behind such blackness and badness had
Vanished completely.
which is my
story.
There
is
no more.
And even if the story
help teller had indeed
Cut himself short.
which it seemed to Chintana he had.
He gave
No indacitation, only hunching his shoulders and
lowering his eyes with a sigh.
a sight so soaked with sadness, even the orphans.
responded to it.
Jindana knew better though,
she listened instead to her chest.
which guarded a more subtle ear, and she
Accepitated the sharpening.
Shrill of her thumb. For even as the social worker snored now in her recliner, and the storyteller
seemed to recomport himself into an even smaller stillness.
Jindana knew what the
orphans were about to ask, which somehow meant she also knew.
He too knew what they would ask and how he would answer. In fact, the only thing Chintana did not know
was how she herself would
respond.
at least get up, she tried to tell herself, but though
Already on the edge of her seat, as in
The poison of a dream, she felt unable to move even.
an itsy bit,
Tarf grunted then, refusing,
unable.
to look away from the long
Box with its angles of
black, and so asking,
Is that the sword? And of course, all five
Windows,
were open now, and the wind had fallen.
clouds,
split apart with falling
hail, ripped,
into the room, and the five
Flames on fire.
wicks on fire.
candles of molasses,
Clothes.
nutmegs,
cinnamon, and
Ginger shook and faltered, but no one there could
heed the candles.
anymore, or understand the
Shadows are hither.
Notes are follow.
the paths.
Not even Chintana, who try as she might, could still not wrench herself free.
And so Tarf did as he was told.
Lifting the first latch.
And so Izay did as he was told.
Lifting the second latch.
And so Inidia did as she was told.
Lifting the third latch.
And so Sithis did as he was told.
Lifting the fourth latch.
And so Mickett did as she was told.
Lifting the last latch.
And then all withdrew as the storyteller leaned forward and lifted the lid.
Hey! Tarf immediately objected.
It's empty!
Yeah! Izad and Nadia.
And Sithis chorused.
Mickett even giggled. The weight is missing.
But the story,
Teller's lack of,
Surprise.
Reminded them.
as he quietly reached in to pull free the finely carved handle.
bound in fall braid and
Beat it with winks of pale pearl.
In fact, so mesmerized was everyone by the promise of its
Mild bend. No one seemed to notice how the storyteller was
Already standing.
Filling the room, his shoulders expanding out to the wall.
the back of his neck pressing up against the ceiling.
all of him.
growling and gawking.
His shadow falling, not from, but towards the terrified
Candlelight where
Upon
He began to swing the handle in a wide but deliberately
slow,
arc as if to pass a long blade through the wicks of those five
candles nearly 6 feet away, where
Indeed, a yellow panic there.
perhaps by extraordinary coincidence momentarily cowered.
to small rounds of blue and drowning smoke. How his lips gleamed sharp
Red then, as gripping
the handle with
Both hands, he raised it high above his head.
twisting his shoulders away.
though never relinquishing his gaze,
fixed
Awfully.
on the orphans.
still seated at his feet.
Instinctively instinctively toughened out, jerked their arms up in front of their faces.
And now you yell, "Sit this leak down and whine."
The Mickett wailed.
Chintana forced herself in from a chair, but she was
Too hard to.
Oh, so very, very too.
Late the story.
Till they're already swinging down and across the necks of the 5
A
orphans.
vicious and terrible round.
with even worse implications if his hands hadn't clutched.
Nothing at all.
For indeed,
At the height of their ruin,
Yet before their crime.
They,
those hands.
pale as February, had been so
So seamlessly so.
and so expertly so,
stripped clean.
replaced with a ladle of angry air.
Tripe, hogwash, baloney, and hooey.
Belinda Kite spat loudly, striding forward, the handle now
Somehow miraculously.
in her possession.
How easily, too, it seemed she had just reached.
Out of the shadows and plucked free from his glacial grasp.
The end of his story.
Despite herself, Chintana was
Overjoyed, even if she also wondered what on earth could have prompted
Such a display of uncommon heroics. Had some protective instinct.
Suddenly necessitated she act on behalf of the orphans, or was it just more evidence of
Belinda Kite's natural predisposition to spoil.
a pretty gripping moment.
Whatever the case, she now dangled.
mercury?
Handle between her two very nimble fingers.
It's time to cut out such doo-doo.
Look closely, my children. This is nothing but a bit of...
Phony foodie.
Whereupon Belinda Kite
To further substantiate her claim,
proceeded to swing and...
To no effect.
stab, gash, cross,
Flame, chop, slash.
hew, pare, lop, perforate, puncture, slit,
pierce, sunder, and jab the
Handle.
at herself, all over herself, around herself, across,
Through, making
sure to cross her knees, thighs,
and waist, dice the fingers, wrists,
elbows and arms, sectioning,
filleting and
lancing, neck, jaw, nose,
ears, and
scalp, a complete hacking and desiccating of her
body,
entire, no part of her uncut,
untouched or
unmitigated.
And everyone there, though
no one else would have admitted the possibility that someone else had
Seen so, or
Saw so.
caught a glimpse
now and then of something
Slippery.
back through the air.
white and vague.
Like a slow, cold fog creeping across.
an evening after
a burial.
Linda Kite sent us.
Storyteller
packing with his long box of black
Angles. And leave.
He did in the aftermath of the blizzard.
Even if no one saw him
Go.
The social worker had loaded the children.
into the van, only to discover it wouldn't start.
Chintana jumper cables didn't help.
The county clerk called the tow truck.
Someone then remarked that the night felt wide and
Deserted.
without creature.
Or comparison.
Rod of wood and mud mute.
The kennel's empty.
Not even a wing flinging its shady.
Whisper over field.
void of paw print, step,
Or even moon. In the kitchen, a caterer informed a just arriving
And very harried schoolteacher that the children had left.
Long ago, to which this very late
Teller of stories.
the only one Mose Dettleson had hired.
Sighed heavily, abandoning at last his plans for animals and
stormy nights in favor of a bowl of spaghetti,
Far,
a
far.
wedge of pear tart.
and eventually a deep glass of scotch, all while he cursed his
Sedan in the early freeze.
Mose still managing to make the caterer giggle with limericks about.
Cutting the cheese.
But the caterer was wrong. The children hadn't
left just yet.
And as midnight,
midnight.
Midnight.
Midnight!
Just as midnight approached, they were
upstairs again in the storytelling room, waiting for the ride.
Revoluting against sleep, peering down at the guests gustering about outside.
in the snow on the
back patio.
Where with most of the caterers.
cut loose hours ago.
A skeleton crew did their best to fast encore
Bottles of sugary champagne and
Filled brim high all those planet goblets.
Somewhere someone began to sing.
None of that, thank you.
Belinda Kite snapped.
Just raise up the bubbly and choke.
It bad.
Happy birthday to me, spoken will do.
The woman with topaz clamped on her ears was the first to scoop a second.
Phil. No doubt to take the edge off.
Many were very drunk, but no one was
Cut off.
Chintana, without a glass of anything.
To fortify herself against the biting cold, didn't know.
What to make of why everyone else,
including herself, had agreed to stand
Outside, Belinda Kite, because she claimed to adore the snow, had demanded her
chose to take place in it. And for some reason,
Everyone obliged, though Chintana could not see many liked it, and even less like her.
Focusing instead on the
champagne,
The clicking of plastic on
Platic rim.
anything and everything but.
Belinda.
And then swiftly by swiftly, as the moments edged closer to midnight,
closer ever to Belinda Kite's
50th birthday.
50th.
Chintana with whirls of
Butterflies suddenly panicking inside her.
So Sunflower Wild began
to understand something she could not have prepared herself for.
No matter Belinda Kite had disaggregated everything that had mattered to her.
Everything that had made sense.
No matter. Chintana now moved through light and stream a grave.
By tense of indecent rage.
Chintana still chose not.
To abandon Belinda Kite.
And so as seconds,
flickered seconds.
on seconds,
From 12,
Like long violet lashes.
Chintana forced herself from the promise of infliction's peace.
it was, after all,
all Chintana had of her. In fact, it was all Belinda Kite had.
of herself.
That once ago frail embroidery her fingers had
Nimbly and tenderly.
Stitched and bled upon, finding in grassy thread the shape of
That single
harvester
with dark orange
wings,
long gone.
yet by which Chintana could now clearly find,
Remembering it.
recovering it,
Reminding it.
releasing it, as she had immediately remembered when
Pravat had at last handed it over to her.
This is what hurt so much.
no deceit at all, but the reach only of
And from a longing and already parting woman.
A reach which tonight
from this same woman.
had also saved 5 children from the murder of
fate. And so Chintana tried hard to keep breathing, even as her
Thumb throbbed terribly
a
and
solitary tear
Sliced down her cheek.
Which was when clock hands across Upshur County finally.
clasped limply around midnight and said goodbye, which was when,
Belinda Kite caught sight of Chintana.
coming apart,
figuratively.
With the tear that is.
Ensnared.
Baby, your hubby was a lousy fuck.
From their window, the children were the first to see the snow splash.
red,
Red.
Even before Belinda Kite
knew what was happening before she could make sense of the
muffled screams and recoil suddenly unrounding her as she
Right on the spot.
Literally.
Went to pieces.
tugged
an idea.
Make it.
his aid and
Sip saw all 5 fingers slide away and tumble to the ground.
In a soundless spray of blood.
but even as slices of joints and nails scattered apart on the frosty stone.
Followed by the slow tumbling.
Slivers of the rest of Belinda Kite's hand. Gold bangles loose.
Chintana was already
Racing forward.
That eradicated others to call for help.
Reaching,
racing.
Oh, how she raced for her.
How she reached for her until she was reaching Belinda Kite, grabbing her,
Holding her.
cradling her in her arms.
wrapping her up tight in her grave coat, the scarf tight around the tortured arm.
Stroking the woman's head, which she understood at any moment.
Could also fall away. And so,
Though Chintana kept calling.
Aloud for someone,
for anyone inside, she quietly continued to accept the mercy-laden,
merciless agony of what
Only survives as
Entire person.
without witness,
All that really matters here.
what only matters.
hers,
Herself,
for now.
Holding on to
patiently,
like she held on to.
just as she held on to.
Belinda Kite.
it. Belinda Kite.
Gently and painfully and
Gratefully, too.
Except for taking them all.
And with great sloppy breaths, too.
even if she also continued to wonder
Just how long one such tiny
anything up?
Could really hold.
Danielewski's The 50-Year Sword. We're going to have a very short Q&A followed by a raffle. So if you all have your raffle tickets, we'll have 2 prizes. One prize. Ah, so it's more competitive. 1 prize, 1 copy of The 50-Year Sword. Take out your neighbor. That's right. You know, just start, get up to lead, take your tickets. Everybody's there. So we'll have Mark Danielewski and Christine Green and John Zalewski. Please come on down. Chair. And after the Q&A and the raffle, we'll have a book signing as well in the lobby. John, the music man. So, 5 questions. Who's got one?
Okay, this is for Christine, actually. You seem to do a really good job of incorporating some important aspects of like the Winter Revolutions and House of Leaves into the performance. How familiar are you, or were you at the beginning with Danielewski's work, and did that change? Was there a difference between like the first season?
It's purely telepathic.
What made you decide to take out the storyteller's, pardon me, but jumble of letters in the middle of the story and replace it with music?
Here's the big question.
I was anticipating this for.
It was a nod in that direction. We probably spoke a disproportionately a long time about that particular section, and it was like a sword, a sky long. It was 2 on the wheel to actually put together in a short period of time. So we gave it a nod, a little gesture. The rest we left up to the discombobulated mind of that year.
Where did the orphan's names come from?
Ooh, secrets. That's a great question. But it's Halloween, it's not Christmas, so we'll have to wonder.
Did you have the actual presentation in mind as you were writing this?
I always knew that it was going to be 5 voices, and so I was pushing more towards something that would be told, purely in an audio form, and then it would have these completed notes, and then it would be this sort of musical experience. And I always wanted to do it, and it was so stage reading. It means that they sort of go over it a couple of hours before the actual reading. And we rehearsed for 2 weeks. I mean, they worked enormously hard, 3 or 4 hours, a set. And I have to say that the thing itself is extremely exhausting. I mean, it's amazing how quickly you're moving and how it just, we're so used to finishing sentences or hearing things kind of completed, and this constant, division of meaning, and yet trying to kind of lift it up and sail it out into one whole thing is very complicated. So it was an incredibly intense experience, but also very rewarding to hear how that can all come together.
I was wondering if you could talk about the set design and the way in which the raised platform seems to be similar to the wraparound porch, or standing really kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was a lot that was going on. Christine and I worked on candles and butterflies. That was a big thing. There were a lot of other big things. Yeah, well, so that was the thing. I wanted candles. I actually initially envisioned candles behind, but all the candelabras were cheesy. And then I wanted to get like fire that would be up and then it would go down. But that was fire hazard. It required all sorts of expensive applications and fire extinguishers. But then Christine, meanwhile, was telepathically working on these 5 windows. And then the more I looked at the actors, because of course they're the orphans, the more I realized that they were the candlesticks. So then the question was, well, how do we look at their lights dimming or being threatened? And so that was how they served in many ways for the candles. And of course you're right with the wraparound porch, and then of course you've got references to leaves and fall and all of that. And then I think one of the things that I actually really started to like with working with the actors and music and the shadows was how the conductor was very much the storyteller, shadow cast there, right? And yet the story was actually being told to the storyteller. Like that was the dynamic that we found that worked best with the actors. Was this idea that they were telling me, the storyteller, a story, which is a sort of odd way of looking at it. But I think the great stories always have that feeling, as if the story had just passed through the storyteller and out, and it wasn't just the storyteller. So there was a lot that was there, and of course we had a limited amount of time, and we were going for all sorts of stuff. You got some of it, right?
Okay.
I'm deeply troubled by where the black box is.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about that?
Where the black box is. That's a question, but I like that you're asking where the black box is, because most people are troubled by what's inside the black box. So I guess, we all have a black box inside us with 5 latches. So maybe what you're really troubled by is that you know exactly what the black box is. You're a little afraid to open those latches. Good luck. Thank you.
Raffle time. One winner. Take your tickets out. Um, 635, 629. No? Going once? You got it. Okay, reception in the lobby